The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good evening and welcome to Ginger Hill Angus. I'm Brooke Miller, a board-certified family physician and rancher from Washington, Virginia. Come along with me this evening as I drive around and walk around the ranch with my granddaughters, as I want to tell you something that's very important for all Americans. As I drive through these fields with my granddaughters, among the Angus cattle we've raised spanning over 7 decades and 5 generations of my family, I'm reminded every day of my moral responsibility as a physician, sworn to protect life and heal the infirmed, as a rancher and steward of the land, committed to producing the safest, healthiest food on the planet. But a dangerous provision is quietly moving through Congress, buried deep in House Bill 9043. It's called Section 453, and it's been written by corporate lobbyists, not farmers, not by scientists, and certainly not by we the people. If passed, Section 453, known as the Pesticide Liability Protection Act, would strip away your right to hold chemical companies accountable. It would give legal immunity to manufacturers of toxic pesticides, even if those products cause cancer, birth defects, or lifelong illness. That's right, as long as the pesticide label matches outdated EPA rules, even if the science has changed, even if harm is proven, you wouldn't be allowed to seek compensation. That's not just wrong, it's unconstitutional. The 5th and 14th Amendments guarantee us the right to seek justice in a court of law. Section 453 takes that right away. It hands hard to update its science and labeling on any regular schedule. Ask yourself, do you trust a label written 10 years ago more than the current science and a court of law? If Section 453 passes, state courts and juries will be powerless. Victims will be silenced. The chemical industry will get a free pass, just like Big Pharma got in 1986. This isn't oversight, this is corporate capture. We're drawing a line in the sand, and I'm asking you to stand with us on the right side of that line, with farmers, with families, and with the Constitution.
Good morning, CHD. I'm so happy to have Dr. Brooke Miller here today, who is both a family practitioner and an emergency room doctor and an Angus beef farmer in Virginia. And he and I are going to discuss the proposed pesticide liability shield and more information on what are the impacts on farmers these days by industry, by government, and other factors. So, Brooke, do you have anything to add before I start questioning you about the pesticide shield and how that is going to affect all of us?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on, Meryl. It's so good to be here, and I've always admired you and your work, and I'm just honored to be here talking to you today.
So I really appreciate you making that video at short notice, because it's a very, very important issue that almost nobody knows about. And we have very little time to alert the world to what the risks are for us. So up until today, there was only one consumer product in the United States that had a liability shield, and that was vaccines that had been put on the childhood schedule by the government. And so you cannot directly sue a manufacturer for any injury you suffer from a childhood vaccine unless the Secretary of Health and Human Services allows you to do so, and you can show that there was basically malicious intent on the part of the company. So that bill passed in 1986, where it's almost how many years ago? For almost 40 years ago, and we're living with the negative effects that flowed from it, which are that products now made by the manufacturers of childhood vaccines do not have to be properly tested because they know they can't be sued. In fact, if they don't test them well, you won't get the evidence that they knew ahead of time that they were a problem. So there's an incentive to not properly test. And there's also a financial incentive to make them in a sloppy and cheap fashion because they won't be harmed if there are problems with the product. If it's not terribly effective, if it's not as safe as it could be, they will generally suffer no adverse consequences. And in 2016, so 9 years ago, 30 years after that original bill, the 21st Century Cures Act added more vaccines. So if a vaccine is now recommended for a woman during her pregnancy, it too has its liability waived. So we're talking now, and not only during pregnancy, but also for adults and children. So that was one way. COVID vaccines, RSV vaccines, as well as the flu shots and the DPT shots, all of which are recommended by CDC for pregnant women, have now had their liability waived as well. Okay, so we saw what happened. We have these dangerous RSV vaccines and very, very dangerous COVID vaccines now still on the market. Monsanto believed in big risks, big rewards, and doing lots of litigation against farmers. If any of its products blew onto a farmer's field, Monsanto would send investigators to steal samples and try to prove the farmer was using their product illegally, and would then sue the farmers. Percy Schmeiser in Canada was a farmer who went up against Monsanto for this reason. Basically spent his whole life savings. Eventually, I think he won because with Monsanto's deep pockets, they can keep appealing and appealing almost forever. In 2018, Bayer, another company that likes to take risks, looking for big rewards, bought Monsanto. And it bought Monsanto's liability for Roundup, which the generic name is glyphosate. And glyphosate is in a huge number of products with all different combinations of chemicals in addition to glyphosate. And glyphosate, Roundup, is the best-selling herbicide in the world. So if you sprayed it in an area, it would kill every plant. It would chelate, it would stop the plants from being able to take up minerals. It acted as an antibiotic. It would kill microorganisms in the soil. And you could plant a Roundup Ready seed that Monsanto had also developed that was resistant to Roundup. So it would kill everything around that seed except your Monsanto seed. So you could have this wonderful, apparently wonderful field with only your corn or your whatever, your soybeans, and other crops that would grow with no weeds. Sounded great for a while. Slowly, of course, the various plants developed resistance to Monsanto's Roundup, so you had to use more of it, or you had to use other herbicides in conjunction with it or in different years. And over time, it became clear that people were getting very sick from exposure to this product. But there was no case that actually won a lawsuit until 2 months after Bayer bought Monsanto. And that was the case of Dwayne Johnson, Michael Baum, and Brett Wisner brought that case. Bobby Kennedy was involved with that case as well, sued Monsanto, which then became Bayer, and they won 2 months after Bayer owned the company. And Johnson, who was very, very ill, got a settlement for over $200 million. And Bayer realized, what have we done? What have we bought? And since then, they've been working very hard to somehow make the liability from this product go away. Now, tell us a little bit more about this, if you will, Brooke.
Well, that's an excellent summary, or actually excellent detailed summary of what's happened. You're exactly right. Monsanto or Bayer is the current owner of Roundup, and immediately after they bought it, they got hit with all these lawsuits, and they've been working as hard as they can to not make their products safer, but make the lawsuits go away. To give you just a little bit of background, and you can correct my numbers if I'm wrong, but in 1986, I think there were 7 antigens or products on the market, and a child received probably 12 doses by the time they were 18. And then after 1986 and the Childhood Vaccine Indemnity Act went into effect, there was a deluge of vaccines that were brought onto the market, and as you know, many of them are felt not to be safe for a lot of scientists and physicians worldwide. And currently, there are over 20 products on the market, I believe, and children can get between 54 and 72 vaccinations or doses before age 18. Now, multiply that by a tremendous factor. You look at what's on the market for pesticides now. There are currently over 500 active ingredients that are registered with the EPA. There are, I believe, 18,000 products produced by 30 main pesticides manufacturers. And if they get a liability shield, the incentive to produce or the incentive to make sure their products are safe just will not be there. And we will probably see a deluge of products on the market. And as long as they label their product as the EPA has instructed, then the failure to harm, the failure to warn clause will go away. And a lot of these judgments, most of these judgments will go away.
Right, exactly. So, so what happened so Bayer has been working hard for years in different ways to get rid of its liability. And actually, while you mentioned the childhood vaccines and their liability shield, I want to point out that once in 2016, the pregnancy vaccines got their liability shield. Industry got very busy trying to make vaccines that you could give to pregnant women, even though Brooke and I know as doctors, you were never supposed to give any drugs, let alone vaccines, in pregnancy, because we didn't know what they were going to do, and certainly not during the first trimester. But what's interesting about the COVID and RSV vaccines in pregnancy is that it was the NIH that developed and patented a particular, how do I say it, a particular design for the antigen, the structure of the antigen. And so that NIH, Fauci's NIAID, got royalties for both the COVID vaccines and the RSV vaccines. So what we had was a joining, some people would call it fascism, where the interests of government and the interests of industry are tightly aligned. And government, NIAID, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease, run by Tony Fauci for over 30 years, was bringing in money every time they sold one of these vaccines. So there was a great incentive to promote. There was also an incentive to the FDA and CDC to license those vaccines, right? Because they were in part government patented, and to promote the use of those vaccines. And so we have a very peculiar conflict of interest that people are not aware of with certain vaccines. The same is true for the HPV vaccines, Gardasil and Cervarix, where also Tony Fauci's institute has a patent on one part of that product, and therefore the government pushed the use of the HPV vaccines and did a lot of the marketing. Okay, so back to Bayer and Monsanto. They came up with a 6-pronged strategy of all the different methods they could use so that one or another would work and they would be able to get rid of the glyphosate liability. So one was they threatened they'd take the product off the market, and farmers who have paid for their, glyphosate Roundup Ready seeds would no longer have a herbicide that would work for them, for those seeds. And they would scare the producers. And they probably didn't scare too many producers, but it was a good story for politicians. So members of Congress were told this was going to happen, and that their states, if they lived in agricultural states, would suffer if Bayer did this.
Meryl, can I just say
Go ahead.
one thing is I have heard several producers show significant concern that Bobby Kennedy was going to remove glyphosate from the market, and there is concern there. I don't think it's founded concern. I don't think, but there is some concern, and I think that strategy is working in some section of agriculture, and they are pushing that narrative.
Thanks for telling me that. And it's interesting how things get twisted. So Bayer had threatened that they would take it off the market because they said, we'll lose money on the product. But somehow now what the farmers are hearing is that it's going to be Bobby Kennedy and HHS taking the product off the market when he has no intention of doing so, certainly at this point. So they also said, look, we could spin off part of our company. Bayer is a huge conglomerate. We'll spin off, the crop weed portion, and they'll get all the liability. They'll pay off some claims. They'll go bankrupt, and there won't be any more money to pay for these, because there's 110,000 cases pending that are suing Bayer for injuries alleged to be due to glyphosate. So they want to get rid of those 110,000 cases.
And I think 90% of them are from homeowners.
Yes, right, gardeners. There are groundskeepers, but farmers should realize that they are generally the most exposed of anyone.
Absolutely. The CDC did a study, and I think of 650 children, where they showed 87% of them had detectable levels of glyphosate in their urine. But I think I read somewhere where kids that grew up on a farm, the levels were generally quite a bit higher than the ones that did not grow up on a farm.
Exactly. So another plan was to develop a bunch of other pesticides, and then and herbicide. So the term pesticide in this case, according to the bill that regulates pesticides, includes herbicides, insecticides, rodenticides, fungicides, pesticides. So that whole class of products is being regulated by this bill rider, 453. So Bayer also went to the states and tried to get rid of the ability to sue in state courts. In the United States, we have both federal and state courts. They have different rules. And, for certain cases like mine, I could choose to sue the board in state court or federal court. So Bayer didn't want state courts, which tended to be more favorable to the plaintiffs. They didn't want them to be able to sue for these pesticide injuries in state courts, and they have been able to win that argument in Georgia and in North Dakota. They've lost it in 4 other states, and there are about a dozen more states where Bayer has brought these bills in to try to end a state cause of action for pesticide injuries. Bayer also has come to the Supreme Court and tried to overturn one of the cases in which it lost for an injury, saying that, look, in some of the cases we've lost, in some of the cases we've won, there is no uniformity, and so we need the Supreme Court to make a decision. And if the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Bayer in such if they decide to take up the case, and they haven't decided yet, that could basically end all the litigation going forward. And then at the federal level, they've got this bill, Section 453, and they have proposed that for several years they've tried to get a rider into the farm bill as well, and it's been in and out, hasn't passed, to basically do the same thing, which is, in this case, to prevent failure to warn as a cause of action by freezing all pesticide labels. So Bayer has joined up with several hundred other pesticide manufacturers and created a fund, a large fund, and a lot of lobbyists to push for freezing pesticide labels in place by only allowing them to be updated if the EPA goes through a multi-year, very detailed process that's specified in this old law on pesticides called FIFRA, FIFRA. And unless it goes through that entire process, EPA and the manufacturers neither will be able to update a label with warnings of what we actually know about the injuries caused by these pesticides. So it's a very clever, method of legally blocking people from saying that the company failed to warn. And that the way these cases have been won is through a failure to warn. Monsanto knew what the injuries could be, were, and didn't tell anybody, and the EPA didn't tell anybody, and therefore people who got sick have won a lot of cases.
Yeah. I think one addition here is the lobbyists and the congressmen that are pushing this rider say it will not, prevent liability. That's poppycock. But when asked what this rider is for, they go silent. They can't give you an answer.
Right. We had lots of people calling in congressmen this past week, and many of them claimed that the bill was not a liability shield at all. And so congressmen have probably been lied to by their own leadership. Their staff has been lied to, but in fact, it is a liability shield. So what happened last week was that the rider got slipped in with 24 hours notice to a subcommittee, an appropriations subcommittee, and they ran it through. And then it went to the full appropriations committee, 63 people. And the Republicans who spoke about it lied about what this bill was, claiming it was not a liability shield, just as their offices had told callers. But then 5 or 6 Democrats spoke right after that and said, no, it is a liability shield, read from the rider itself, explained what was going on. They got very fiery. This is as Brooke said, it's a bill written by the corporation for the corporation. It's an anti-citizen bill. It does nothing for the population of the United States. It's only good for the pesticide industry. And when they all got done, they had a voice vote, and it wasn't clear who won on the voice vote. Who's louder? Well, both sides sounded about the same. There were 28 Democrats and 35 Republicans on that committee. And the chair of the committee, Tom Cole, said, okay, the nays have it. In other words, we're going to leave the rider in. It will remain part of the appropriations bill, this pesticide liability shield. And what was supposed to happen next was that a Democrat, who allegedly they were all against this liability shield, none of them called for a roll call vote, which is what you need to actually get a count. Everybody has to say how they're voting, every member of the committee. Then you have a count and you know who's in favor and who's against. Nobody called for that of the 63 members. So what we know is that both parties worked together to ensure the fact that this liability shield would stay in the appropriations bill, which is a must-pass bill. It's going to be very hard to pull it out now, unless we can embarrass the members who are voting in favor of it, at a higher level. Either the full House and the full Senate will have to vote for a bill with this rider in it, unless the leadership pulls it out. And how much fighting there will be about that, we don't know, because we know that Bayer had a multi-billion-dollar slush fund basically to use for lobbying. And so the bill may just continue to go forward. You have any more thoughts on this, Brooke?
Um, yeah, I'm not sure why the Democrats didn't call for a roll call vote, whether they actually wanted the bill to go through or whether they just didn't want a record at this point in time to try to use it politically down the road. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of possibilities. So they could have been bribed, but why not? Bribed by Bayer, bribe both sides. They didn't want to embarrass the Republicans individually. Also, had they done so, had they forced a voice vote, some of the Republicans might have crossed over with the Democrats because they didn't want to be tied to having voted for this very dirty bill. So it might have, the Democrats might have won the vote. They probably wanted to be able to use it against the Republican Party, certainly at the midterms. It's hard to know. I happen to think we have a uniparty and that they all work together, and that most of what happens when they appear to be fighting each other is, it's just theater. It's just a performance. And when things are crumbling around us, it's amazing that this bill managed to sort of eke its way through fairly quietly, because this is a major change in the way we do business in the United States. Taking a whole industry, the pesticide industry, whose products are made to be toxic, they're made to kill organisms, and saying that these, by definition, toxic products are now going to be shielded from all liability. It's a huge thing. Why wouldn't the plastics industry, the drug industry, the personal care products industry, why wouldn't they now ask for liability shields? This could be the beginning of liability for products going away and the products we are exposed to becoming much less safe. This is the worst industry to give a liability shield to. So, where's it going to go from here?
Like I stated earlier, if this does pass through both houses of Congress, this will be one of the worst things in the history of our country as far as health and wellness to occur. I see people that go to Europe, and I've been to Europe, and we have so many chemicals that we can use here in this country that are not used in Europe, and they don't have, as far as I know, have GMOs in Europe. And people go over there and eat the grain, eat the pasta in Italy, and they don't gain weight, they don't get sick, they don't get IBS, but they come home and you eat a grain or grain product in this country, which is most likely has traces of glyphosate and other chemicals in it, and you see a completely different patient. You see people with gastrointestinal issues, you see people with obesity issues and metabolic issues, and it has to change the microbiome. It has to change the microbiome, whether it's the GMOs or a combination of the GMOs and the toxins. But I just wish that people would wake up, and that Congress would really actually see what in the world is going on here, and have a little bit of moral fiber and do the right thing, as opposed to just doing what leadership wants them to do or what the lobbyists are supporting them to do.
Thank you for that. That's really important. So, and I'm going to now bring up beef and pink sludge. So pink sludge is after you've butchered a cow and you've taken everything you can off of it as pieces of meat, you then take what's left and put it through a big processing series of processes to suck the last, molecules of red meat and sometimes some tendon and other stuff off, and then use heat and you centrifuge it, and then usually you use ammonium hydroxide on it to kill the bacteria or whatever else is left. And you've got this stuff, which is a slurry, a sludge, and you call it, and it was called by somebody at EPA or USDA pink sludge because of what it
Pink
looked like.
slime is what you're referring to?
Pink slime, thank you. Sorry, pink slime.
Yeah.
And up to 15% of your ground beef can be pink slime, which has 200 parts per million of ammonia in it. Now, this stuff is banned in Canada, and as you said, Brooke, it's banned in Europe. But we get it. There was media about it in 2012, and for a while, companies said they were going to take it out, and then they quietly put it back into their products. Now, another thing that we get that you don't get in a lot of other countries is 26 or 23% of the ground beef that is sold in the United States is imported. And we don't know where it comes from because the United States is not permitted, at least this year it's not permitted, to label meat with the actual country of origin. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. That's something that's near and dear to my heart. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as truth in labeling at the meat counter. In 2015, the World Trade Organization, the Canadian and Mexican governments sued the United States, stating that our mandatory country of origin labeling law was harming their markets and counter to the North American Free Trade Agreement. And that went back and forth for years in the courts. And finally, in 2015, a Mexican judge ruled that it was anti-competitive and harming the markets of Canada and Mexico. And he awarded retaliatory tariffs to those countries in the billions. Congress immediately panicked and repealed mandatory country of origin labeling. And the U.S. farmer and ranchers saw a 40% drop in their live cattle market within 2 weeks of that ruling and that repeal of mandatory country of origin labeling. The law then reverted to an old USDA law that stated any product that is sold in the meat counter, whether it be born and raised in the United States or imported from another country, could be labeled product of the USA if it were significantly transformed within our borders. And their definition of significant transformation was slicing and packaging and repackaging. So essentially, the product of the USA label really was not truthful and meant basically nothing. And the American consumer has been basically deceived for all these years. I would venture that currently today, more than 23% of our ground beef is imported. There was a market report as of July 1, the national cow herd in the United States is the smallest on record. And that goes back for over 70 years. So we're losing farmers and ranchers at an alarming rate. We now import more beef than we export. We are a net importer of beef. This is a national security issue, and it goes back to one thing, and that's monopolization in the packing industry that has destroyed free market enterprise and free markets in our country. Farmers and ranchers are retiring. They're going broke. They're just getting out of business or going bankrupt, and there's nobody there to replace them. The younger generations are not going into farming and ranching. They see an easier life in other vocations, and it's a serious issue in my mind. If we become dependent upon foreign countries for our food sources, just like we would become dependent on foreign countries for our medicines, our manufacturing. It's not a good thing. And I've been fighting this battle for 10 years or more, trying to get somebody to listen. And some people do listen, but there is just not the will in Congress, because the lobbies use our checkoff dollars. There's something called the beef checkoff that each producer, when they sell an animal, They pay $1 into the beef checkoff, and it's supposed to go to promote research and development and promote use of or consumption of that product in the American consumer. And we have a large lobby in the United States called the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. It sounds like a great organization to be a part of, but it's very much their focus is very much anti farmer and rancher, and the reason that we're in the shape that we're in is because they pretty much have shaped the USDA and shaped Congress in their rulings, and we've left with a system where farmers and ranchers just can't make a good, decent wage or living.
Can you explain to people how this monopolization in the meat processing industry happened and how that has now been devastating for farmers and ranchers?
Well, it's occurred over decades. Congress and the Department of Justice have allowed mergers and acquisitions. Currently, we have 4 major packing companies that are worldwide packing companies that control 85% of the slaughter protein in the United States and worldwide. That would be 2 of them would be Brazilian companies, JBS and Marfrig. Marfrig owns National Beef, which is their subsidiary here in the United States. And then you have Cargill, which is a USA company, and Tyson Foods. And I also received some bad news this morning from a concerned grower and producer in Tennessee that he's hearing that Tyson Foods is going to sell off their beef division. And so that'll make it even worse. That'll be 3 major packers that will control 85% of the protein market in the United States. And they basically, they just don't compete. They don't compete in the fat cattle industry. They have corporate feeders that they have forward contracts and sweetheart deals with that are not known, that are secretive, and there's just no competitive free market. And it's running all the independent cattlemen out of the market because if they want to break the market, they can. They just don't have to buy their cattle. Now, currently, we're enjoying, for the past year, we're enjoying probably the highest live cattle prices in the history of the beef industry, but it's a result of the policies that have made so many people get out of business that there is now a national shortage of beef in this country.
Right. So explain how there used to be lots of meat processing plants around the country. And as a result of federal regulations, most of them had to close in the last several decades. So now the beef farmers like you don't have access to packers. If a packer doesn't like you, you may have nowhere else to go. You might have to take your cattle 500 miles to get to another place, but they're in cahoots with the first guy, so they're going to offer you the same deal. And what they really want to do is put you out of business and buy your farm and buy your cattle and consolidate the industry even more. So how is that affecting you and the people you know? Brooke Miller, by the way, is the past president of the U.S. Cattlemen's Association. And so he has represented a whole lot of ranchers in this country and is very familiar with the sagas they can tell. And I'd like you to give us a few examples of how this has really affected people in the industry.
Well, if I just drive out through my county right now, when I was a kid, there were cattle everywhere, and the pastures looked healthy. Pastures need cattle on them to make them look healthy. They need farmers who are stewards of the land out there and running cattle because they're good for the land. And right now, what we have in my area here in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, we have very few cattle ranchers, true cattle ranchers here. And we have a lot of land that is owned by people that have no interest or expertise in ranching. And the land just absolutely looks horrible. We have all these invasive weeds and species and trash grasses that grow and shrubs. And you can just see it by the quality of how the land is look and how the land looks and how the land is kept up.
So it would not be suitable fodder for cattle at this point in time?
Um, It'd be better than nothing. I mean, cattle it wouldn't be as productive, is what I'm saying. It would not be nearly as productive. There'd be a lot of excess growth from invasive species and plants that are not desirable. But the soil is really, what I'm getting at is the soil is really, being harmed by this. I mean, the soil needs microbes. We have a microenvironment. The cattle trample the land. They poop on the land. It's a whole ecosystem in itself. And you take the cattle off the land, and you can see a disruption in this whole ecosystem.
Yes. Are you having topsoil loss as well as a result of this?
No, there's
probably out west more than in Virginia.
No, there's not topsoil loss. It's just a loss of fertility. A lot of what happens is these people will come in and they let the fences go down, and they will, in order to keep this area open and quote beautiful, there's something called land use taxation that a lot of local governments go by. And if you keep the land in agriculture, then you're taxed at what its value is from an agricultural rate, not from a development rate. So a lot of these people will basically give their land use to make hay on to local farmers and ranchers so they can have a tax benefit, which is really good for the county. But it's not good for the land, because most of the people that are taking hay off these lands are not putting nutrients back onto the soil.
Right.
And you get a lot of problems there as far as the grasses and the species that we're talking about.
Right. You're depleting your soils of minerals, and microbes.
Nutrients, yeah.
Exactly. You mentioned the checkoff program before, and I don't think the audience knows what that is. You started to explain it, but basically it's a tax that all the farmers and ranchers have to pay, which is supposed to be used to support them, to lobby for them, to develop markets for them, to do research for them, etc. But what's happened is that these very large companies, which they don't, for instance, these big packing companies, some of them also own farms. They also are importing their own beef from Mexico or Brazil or Argentina. And they are vertically and horizontally integrating industries. So they're not only meat processors, they're not only ranchers, but they're also then making the finished products and maybe even owning the grocery stores that sell these products. And so, again, of course, they're trying at every step of the way, they're trying to do things as cheaply as possible and make the biggest profit as possible. I forgot where I'm going with that, but.
Well, you're exactly right. The checkoff has been, it's filled with corruption. I think in the 80s, there was a meeting, and I was a young man then, and I wasn't paying that close of attention to what was going on and stuff like political stuff. But in the 80s, there was a meeting, and the National Cattlemen's Association merged with basically the association that represents the packers, and they called it, one industry, one voice. Well, the problem is the packers got a lot of money, and they pretty much have captured this organization, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And, while we're in the same industry, we have competing interests. The packers are trying to buy the cattle as cheaply as they can. And a lot of times they win out because they don't have to compete. There's only 3 major packers now, and they don't have to compete for beef with anybody else. So there's no free market. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association, just to give you an example, American Farm Bureau and National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which are the 2 largest supposed agricultural lobbies in the country, were both against, they stood firmly against and lobbied against mandatory country of origin labeling. Now, how could that be good for the American farmer and rancher and the American people for us not to be able to identify our product at the grocery store and the American consumer not be able to have a choice on where they buy their meat and beef from?
Yes, exactly. So this organization is captured just like the American Medical Association, which doesn't represent doctors and doesn't represent patients, represents pharma or the industries that give it money, and I think it several $100 million, I think, come in every year to that organization.
Yeah,
Or
that's
like
a
the WHO.
great analogy, Meryl. That's exactly what it is. And it's sad because it's destroying our industry. It's destroying family farms and ranchers all across America, and rural America.
So thank you very much. Do you have anything else you wanted to tell the audience, Brooke?
As far as what we've talked about today, I hope they will share this message. And right now, and immediately, we need to share the message about the Pesticide Liability Protection Act, Section 453 from House Resolution 9043, and try to share it with your friends and your coworkers and your family, and call your congressman and say, hey, we want this removed from this appropriations resolution. This is anti-American, it's anti-citizen, and it's very much has the potential to harm the health and wellness of all the citizens of this country, especially the children.
Yeah, now the House is on recess until September 2nd. So call their office and ask for a meeting and bring a bunch of your friends and tell them, if you take away the ability for us to win cases against Monsanto, Bayer, and all the other pesticide, this is for everybody. Every pesticide company gets this liability shield. If you take that away, there will only be more and more dangerous substances in our food and in our environment. Right now, close to 90% of Americans have glyphosate measurable in their blood and urine. We don't want more of this. We want to get healthier. This has nothing to do with MAHA. This is the opposite of MAHA. Why the Trump administration is allowing this to go forward is a travesty. And we need your help. So they're not going to be able to pass this until September. So we've got about 5 weeks to work on them and tell them we won't put up with it. And if we can do it, successfully enough, if we can make a loud enough noise, we will push this back again. And if we don't, we're going to get more and more dangerous substances in our food and our playgrounds. So
yeah, it's gonna, if you look at the electoral map, rural America was, largely red and was huge as far as putting Trump in office, as was MAHA. And this is completely anti anything that rural America needs and anything that the MAHA people were voting for. Likewise, putting free market competition back into our beef industry to save the beef industry. We need that. I mean, that's a national security issue. And if we become dependent upon Brazil or Mexico for our food, I mean, that's just not a good scenario. That's not going to end up good. So, try to spread the word on both of these issues with all your friends and neighbors. And, when you go to the grocery store, try to find out exactly where the beef was. I guarantee you they probably won't be able to tell you. So then you have other choices. You can buy directly from farmers and ranchers that are trying to bypass the system. And that gets into a whole nother deal like the Prime Act and the regulations that they're putting on these small custom processing plants. They need to, they can regulate them out of business. And that's what the big packers are trying to do, is trying to get their lobbies to increase regulation, because they're the only ones that can comply with that regulation in an economic fashion. And if you really look at things, Meryl, I have, in my lifetime, I have never seen a health-related issue come out of one of these small packing plants. It's always been one of these big multinational mega packing plants where they slaughter hundreds of thousands of cattle each week.
Yes, exactly. Well, we're going to push for farmers to be able to contract directly with consumers, but right now it's difficult because the federal government has inserted itself in between consumers and farmers, not allowing them to sell cut meat directly. They can sell you a cow. In some states, they can sell you half a cow or a quarter of a cow. But you can't just go onto a farm and buy a piece of meat. That is against the law right now, unless they have used one of these big USDA inspected packing facilities, packing and processing facilities. And yet, as Brooke said, when a farmer butchers the meat himself, there are no reports of illness emanating from that process. And he might kill at the most one cow a week and butcher it. But these large packing plants may be slaughtering 5,000 cows in a day and processing them. They're full of injuries to their workers, and there are not enough USDA inspectors to actually inspect all the cattle before and after and make sure that cattle with cancer, cattle with infections are not getting into the food supply. So, yeah, my organization, Door to Freedom, is going to be working on trying to get the USDA out of arrangements between meat consumers and farmers and let small processors process small amounts of meat on farm and allow people who come to the farm to buy it to actually buy it without both of them becoming criminals, which is what the situation is currently.
Yeah,
So
in Virginia, we are fortunate enough to have small custom packing plants here that we can sell quarters and halves and wholes to people. But we should be able to sell individual cuts of beef, and unless it's USDA inspected, we cannot. And the other thing is the state. There are a lot of state inspection facilities whose health requirements are equal to or better than the federal ones, and we're outlawed from sending meat across state lines if it's state inspected and not federally inspected.
You know, that's a good point, because in Maine, during the early part of COVID, when people could not get meat, the state suddenly decided to allow three of the custom processing facilities to suddenly act like they were state inspected and allowed. So right now, for everyone who's listening, if you go to a custom meat processor, they can butcher your animal and process it, put it into cuts, but every one of those cuts is going to be labeled not for resale. What happened in 2020 in Maine is that the state allowed some of them to actually process the meat and resell it. Give it back to the farmer for resale or sell it directly to stores within the state. So by fiat, by waving their magic wand, the state said custom facilities are now state inspected facilities. And we'll send them some more inspectors, but they didn't have inspectors on site continuously, the way the USDA requires. And so it can be done. It was done, as I say, at the beginning of COVID. We can do it again, if we force these folks to. The USDA has been very reticent. They want to control the entire meat industry. And basically, they want to allow these monopolies, these very small number of huge multi-billion-dollar corporations in cahoots with the USDA to control the whole meat industry, the beef industry in the United States. Companies already control the poultry industry and the pig industry in the United States. They're not happy that ranchers can actually let cows eat grass and that they don't live in these CAFOs, they don't live in buildings where they have no room to move. They're stuffed full of grains, and they're killed as quickly as possible. That is what the industry would like. And the best beef is beef that spends its whole life eating grass the way it was meant to. And if we want to have that kind of food available to us in the future, we have to fight back with this continuing consolidation, monopolization of the industry, with fewer and fewer companies controlling the meat supply in the United States.
One quick, just a little piggyback on what we're talking about. Two things actually. You know, we sell quarters, halves, and wholes to a lot of people locally and in the region, but we have people that don't have space for a freezer or don't have enough money to buy a quarter of an animal, and they ask me often, like, "Hey, can I buy some hamburger from you?" And I have to say, "I'm sorry, I cannot sell you hamburger because it's against the law." So it's really hurting the American consumer. And then the other thing that you and I have talked about just a little bit, but not on today's program, is the climate change agenda and how it's going after cattle producers. They've found it really hard to monopolize and get the ranchers off the land, but now they're pushing really hard on methane production in cattle and trying to convince everybody that methane is destroying the environment and causing climate change, which is completely absurd. But our very own American Angus Association, which is the largest breed organization in the world, has accepted $4.85 million from the Bezos Earth Fund and the Global Methane Hub to study methane production in cattle. And so now they're going to develop something called an EPD, which is a ranking system on cattle that produce the lowest amount of methane, and they're going to vertically integrate our industry if we don't use the genetics that they say we need to use, which are usually, you know, nobody knows how it's going to turn out, but you know it's going to be manipulated scientific data in their favor. So that's something that's really burning up the beef industry right now. And a lot of people, a lot of breeders and producers are up in arms about that. That's probably the number one hot button issue right now is the American Angus Association jumping in with the climate crazies.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, one of the special things about the industry is that people like Brooke control the genetics of their cows. They know, you know, they breed them. They know who the father and the mother were, and they know what traits they're looking for, and they know whether they have weak joints or, you know, a problem here, a problem there. Once you allow this huge, you know, multinational probably organization to start telling you the genetics of the cows you're going to grow, you have lost control of your herd. You don't know what they're going to give you, and there are some examples showing that the cows that they want you to breed based on the amount of methane in their belches are not going to be ideal. You're going to lose money on them. And this is another way of putting you out of business.
Yeah,
now,
the packing industry is looking for a type of animal that they can, an end product, and it's very much not an animal that can work on grass and the environment and work within our environment and be, I hate the word sustainable, but sustainable for our environment and you know, work for a farmer and rancher and not put him out of business by having to feed him and be a high input animal. These are low input animals that we use that are very much in tune with the environment and the resources that we have.
Yeah. And, you know, another sneak attack, you know, under the aegis of the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, climate change and helping the environment. But it's a way to steal the land of the farmers and ranchers. And
you're exactly right. It's a control issue. They want. It's not about the environment. If it was about the environment, they'd be talking about this pesticide issue. And it's not
exactly.
People, it's not about the health of children. They'd be talking about that, and they wouldn't be flying around on their jets and their yachts and their mega mansions, the 10 mega mansions that they have. They'd actually be walking the walk as opposed to just talking the talk. It's about their control of everything. And, you know, the people that are pushing this are so invested in fake meat lab-grown meat, and they just want to control everything. And if the only way you can control rural America is get the ranchers off the land and prevent them from being able to produce food for their neighbors and for the country. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get us off the land so they can control people, because hungry people are compliant. And as you know, Meryl, country people are pretty independent, and overwhelmingly they love their freedom, and they're not controllable. They're not, most of them are not worried about making $250,000 a year. They just want to live a happy life and be free. And if you're going to control those people, you got to make them hungry.
That's right. And the United States, as you pointed out, in the last couple of years has become a net food importer as well as a net beef importer, which is crazy because we have some of the best land in the world. There's no reason for this, but it is a plan to reduce our self-sufficiency and make it easier to control us. And as you said, it's a national security issue that the people who are supposed to be concerned about national security are completely ignoring.
Yeah.
So we've got to go. Go ahead.
Best land and best genetics. It's other countries use our genetics because we have the best genetics in the world, and our genetic base is very diversified. And if this vertical integration occurs, we will see a very narrowing of the genetic. There will be no genetic diversity, and that's always a really, really bad thing in nature.
Exactly. So thank you so much. You've really explained a lot to the audience. We'll be back next month. We're going to be talking about farm and food issues again and MAHA issues. So come back then. And we will be starting a short program, a 20-minute program weekly on CHD TV, starting next week, discussing these issues as well. So thanks for watching. Thank you, Brooke. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it very much.
Okay, we are live.
Okay.
So tell everyone your name.
My name is Mitch Kelly.
And really 3 generations of unvaccinated.
Yes, going on our third. So I didn't vaccinate my daughter when she was born. She's 34 years ago. She may have had one round in the hospital that I wasn't aware of. If they took her and did something, they weren't doing mandatory Hep B at that time. So as far as I know, there wasn't anything, but I made a decision very early on to not vaccinate. It just didn't make sense to me. She went to a well baby visit. They talked about injecting her, I think it was a polio, live polio vaccine. And I asked them how that works. And they said, we're gonna take a little live polio and inject it in your baby, and it will help her build antibodies. And I just thought that doesn't make sense. Why would I take my perfectly healthy baby, inject her with a live disease so she doesn't get the live disease? Like, no, we're not going to be doing that. So that's what started it for me.
Well, wait, but were you vaccinated?
No.
Were your parents vaccinated?
Don't know, probably.
So the generations you're talking about is your generations?
Mine, and then my daughter, and not my grandson.
Okay, I hear you. Okay, so why?
Right.
Yeah, carry on.
Okay, so basically it wasn't a big issue. You know, we're talking 33 years ago. No, it's not like not vaccinating your child today. Our only issue we came across when she started kindergarten, I got a call from the principal, come up to the school. You either need to bring her vaccination records or she needs to go home. And again, this was 30 years ago. So went up to the school. I said, no, she does not need to be vaccinated. I handed her just a written out, we have a religious exemption. That was it. No, and that was all we had to contend with her entire generation of growing up. When she hit 17 or 18, she had an appointment with an OBGYN. First time I was working, I couldn't go with her. I sat her down. I said, there's a new vaccine out, HPV. Do not get it, no matter what, under any circumstances. No matter what they say, do not get this vaccine. If you do, I will not pay for it. Do not do it. She went to the appointment. And when she left the house, I actually called the doctor's office and I told them, I am not giving my consent for my daughter to have an HPV. She was coming in for this, this, and this. No HPV. Understood. She goes to her appointment. I get a call 15, 20 minutes later. She is sobbing. I got it. I got the shot. I'm like, what do you mean you got the shot? She had 3 nurses come in and tell her that if she didn't get the shot, that she would die from cancer. So she took it. She's had all kinds of thyroid issues, diagnosed Hashimoto's ever since, and to this day struggles with some autoimmune issues. So fast forward, she is now an adult. She has her first baby, which is my grandson. She had a very unhealthy pregnancy, preeclampsia, high blood pressure. She ended up having an emergency C-section almost 3 months early, the baby. So she was living in Chicago at the time. By the time I got off the plane, they'd already taken the baby, went to Rush Hospital, to NICU, and as I was walking in, the nurses were walking out saying, we're taking the baby to give him this Hep B vaccine. Now, the baby, again, was 3 months premature. His lungs were not even developed. Just were taken to get a Hep B vaccine. No, halt. I'm like, that baby is not having a Hep B vaccine under any circumstances. We do not want a Hep B for him at this time. Nurse leaves. 10 minutes later, the doctor appears. I hear that you are objecting to the hepatitis B vaccine. Well, can I ask you why? So a lot of debating back and forth, explained to him that the kid was going to be in NICU for 30 minutes or for 30 days, and unless they're using dirty needles in NICU, which I think they're not, or he's having unprotected sex, there's no need for it. So the point of this story is, the minute I left, they all came in, got her and her husband, 3 different nurses, made them watch 2 or 3 different videos. At the end of one of the videos, her husband said, do you think we should do it? She's like, no, we're not doing it. He goes home from the hospital. My daughter's still in NICU with the baby. She's not even in her door, and she receives a phone call from the hospital to the husband saying, we don't need your permission to vaccinate the baby. So if you give us, we just need one parent. They were so manipulative. They waited till the husband left. You have this young couple, right, who has a premature baby that they're not even sure is going to survive, and they're trying to pit the husband and the wife against each other. It was just abhorrent. So they didn't do it. They get him out of the hospital. They bring him home. She locks herself in the house with him, doesn't take him out for maybe 3 or 4 months until her husband's insistence to go to a baby checkup because they want to make sure his weight's well, all that. She goes to the hospital or to the doctor, and they just are doing and guying about how fabulous he is. They can't believe how well he's doing, how well he's thriving, which was very interesting to me because they said he was fine, but they were shocked at how well he was doing. So in that visit, the nurse walks in with a tray, I think 6 different syringes, a total of 10 different vaccines. We'd like to get him caught up, since he's here. She said, I'm not giving him 10 vaccines today. And they said, and escorted her out of the practice, basically. They said, if you do not do these vaccines before we leave, you're out. So they escorted her out, told her good luck, on her way. So she found a different doctor. He's doing very well to this day. However, he's been excluded from parties. It's torn families apart. It's cost them their friends. And it's just been a rough road. And that's it.
So you only have one child?
One child.
So this is not actually 3 generations of unvaccinated. Your daughter had a Gardasil.
No, I wasn't.
You weren't vaccinated, and then your daughter wasn't until she got herself one Gardasil.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
You need to change that title, Claire.
Sorry.
It's not your fault.
Yeah.
And then the bullying in the hospital. as well is something we hear a lot about. So how old is that grandchild today?
7.
And describe actually what he's like, because he is totally unvaccinated, correct?
Yes, he is totally unvaccinated. So when they escorted her out of the doctor's office that day, their final words to her were, "Good luck finding a pediatrician in Chicago who will treat him without being vaccinated." And she said, "Well, I'll take my chances." My mom gave me a whole list of doctors to call. They found an amazing doctor in Chicago who I believe you've talked to several times. And when they had his first visit, everyone was dancing around the vaccine conversation. And he says, "Okay, I hate to address the elephant in the room, but what have you done with vaccines?" And she was afraid to tell him because she didn't want to get kicked out of another office. She said, "We haven't vaccinated him." Doctor stood up, walked across the room, high-fived her, high-fived her husband, said, "Good job, Mama. This baby was a number 1 risk for a severe autistic outcome because he was so premature. He was white and a boy." They've continued to keep this doctor, even though they've moved across the country, and they go to see him. They have to drive their...
Why do you in America? Why do you have to see a pediatrician if your child's not sick?
You don't. And
okay, I say we need to stop this.
She needs to go see him twice a year to stay within the practice for his medical exemption.
It's so messed up, the system, isn't it?
So she drives all the way to every year to take this perfectly healthy boy so he can keep his medical exemption. That's why. He doesn't go to well baby visits. He doesn't do any of that.
They're called hell baby checks.
Baby, yes, hell baby visits.
Well, look, thank you so much for that story. It is interesting, though. I think it's always an education for people. You know, the bullying. We need to show everyone this is not okay. It's not okay for these parents to be bullied like this, and the doctor's lies. Not okay.
You know, the whole thing with the doctors calling the husband. Here you have this young couple, their first child. He's very ill. They don't even know if he's going to survive, and they're trying to pit the husband against the wife, going behind her back to try and get her husband to okay that Hep B vaccine. I mean, it's just
disgusting.
It's so evil.
We hear that a lot, though, to be honest.
Yeah, just so evil. So
okay, viewers, we'll be back in a minute.
So.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.